The smell of expensive perfume mixed with freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Jessica moved between the tables, her feet already aching even though her shift had just started 3 hours ago. She balanced a tray of empty champagne glasses, careful not to bump into anyone wearing a dress that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. The Belmore Club wasn't like the diner where she used to work. Here everything sparkled. The silverware was actual silver. The napkins were pressed so crisp they could cut paper. And the people? Well, they lived in a different world altogether. A world where dropping $500 on dinner was just another Tuesday night. Jessica had been working here for 3 years now. 3 long years of yes ma'am, right away sir, and would you like another glass of wine? She'd gotten good at being invisible. That was the trick, really. Move quietly, smile politely, and never make eye contact for too long. The wealthy folks who came here didn't want to see their servers as real people. They wanted ghosts who appeared with food and disappeared just as quickly. Tonight was special, though. Well, special for them anyway. The annual fundraiser for the City Opera House brought out everyone who was anyone. Women wore gowns that glittered under the crystal chandeliers, their jewelry catching the light with every movement. Men stood in small groups, discussing business deals and stock markets, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Jessica's grandmother used to say she was born in the wrong life. You've got champagne dreams, sweetie, but we're living on a tap water budget. Grandma Rose always said it with a smile, but there was truth in those words. Jessica had dreams once, big ones, the kind that made her heart race and her hands shake with excitement. She'd wanted to be a performer. Not famous necessarily, just someone who could make a living doing what she loved. Singing, playing piano, making music that moved people. She'd been good too. Really good. Her high school music teacher had told her she had something special, something that couldn't be taught. But special doesn't pay the bills, and when Grandma Rose got sick, when the medical bills started piling up like snow in a blizzard, Jessica had to make a choice. College acceptance letters went into a drawer. The scholarship to the music academy got declined. Dreams got folded up and put away like old clothes you might wear again someday, knowing you probably never would. She'd gotten a job at a diner first, then worked her way up to the Belmore Club where the tips were better and the hours were worse. She didn't regret it. Not exactly. Grandma Rose had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. Everything Jessica knew about love, about kindness, about not giving up even when life knocked you down, she'd learned from that woman. So when Grandma needed her, the choice was simple. Dreams could wait. Family couldn't. Jessica pushed through the kitchen doors with another empty tray. The head chef was yelling at someone about a sauce being too thick. The dishwashers moved in practiced rhythm, their hands red from hot water. She'd just started loading dirty plates when she heard Mrs. Pemberton's voice from the hallway, sharp with panic. No, you don't understand. This is our biggest event of the year. We have 300 guests expecting entertainment. Jessica peeked around the corner. Mrs. Pemberton was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear so hard it was probably leaving a mark. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Laryngitis. Tonight? Are you absolutely certain you can't? Yes, I understand. Feel better? She hung up and looked like she might cry. The evening's performer had canceled. Jessica learned this by listening to Mrs. Pemberton make call after call, each one more desperate than the last. Every musician in the city seemed to be booked, out of town or unavailable on such short notice. The grand piano in the corner of the main room sat silent and empty, like a promise no one could keep. Jessica had noticed that piano the first day she started working here. It was beautiful. A black Steinway that probably cost more than a house. Sometimes during slow afternoons, she'd walk past it and let her fingers brush across the polished wood, remembering what it felt like to play, to lose herself in music until the whole world faded away and there was nothing but melody and emotion and the pure joy of creation. She hadn't played in 3 years. Hadn't sung anything but Happy Birthday at Grandma Rose's party last month. It felt like another lifetime. Those days when she'd spend hours at the piano, working through complicated pieces until her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting so long. Her old music teacher used to say she had a gift, that people would pay good money to hear her play and sing, but that was before real life crashed in like a wave and pulled all those dreams out to sea. Jessica watched Mrs. Pemberton make another call, watched her shake her head in defeat. The woman looked exhausted, defeated. 300 guests were expecting a show, and she had nothing to give them. Jessica thought about all those people out there, dressed up and ready for an evening of culture and entertainment. She thought about the money they'd paid, money that would go to support the opera house and music programs for kids who loved music the way she once had. And she thought about that piano, sitting silent in the corner. Her heart started beating faster. Her palms got sweaty. This was crazy. She was a waitress. She wore a black and white uniform and comfortable shoes, and she carried trays of food. She didn't perform for rooms full of wealthy strangers who expected perfection. But she could play that piano. She could play it well. Grandma Rose's voice echoed in her memory. Regret is heavier than fear, sweetie. Always has been. Jessica's feet started moving before her brain could talk her out of it. She walked toward Mrs. Pemberton, each step feeling like it took forever and no time at all. The coordinator was staring at her phone like it might magically produce a pianist if she looked hard enough. Excuse me? Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Pemberton looked up, surprised to see one of the servers standing there. Yes, Jessica's mouth went dry. This was insane. What was she thinking? These people paid serious money for world-class entertainment, and she was just a waitress who used to play piano in high school. Used to sing in a school musical. Used to dream about stages and spotlights and applause. Used to. But somewhere deep inside, beneath 3 years of practical choices and suppressed dreams, something stirred. Something that remembered the feeling of fingers on piano keys, of a voice soaring through a melody, of making music that made people feel something real. I can play, Jessica said, louder this time. The piano. I can play it. If you need someone. Mrs. Pemberton's eyes widened, scanning Jessica from head to toe, taking in the server uniform and sensible shoes. The skepticism on her face was clear as glass. Mrs. Pemberton stared at Jessica for what felt like an eternity. Her eyes moved from Jessica's face down to her server uniform, then back up again. The look said everything. You a waitress? Play for my exclusive event. You play piano, Mrs. Pemberton repeated slowly, like she was trying to make sense of words in a foreign language. Jessica's confidence wavered. Maybe this was a terrible idea. Maybe she should just go back to clearing tables and forget she'd ever opened her mouth. But something made her stand her ground. Yes, I've been playing since I was 6 years old. Studied classical and contemporary. I can sight read if you have sheet music, or I can play from memory. Mrs. Pemberton's phone buzzed again. Another text, probably another musician turning her down. The woman glanced at the screen, then back at Jessica. Desperation was starting to win over doubt. Have you performed professionally? Jessica hesitated. High school auditoriums and church recitals probably didn't count as professional in Mrs. Pemberton's world. I've performed for audiences before. I was accepted into the Riverside Music Academy on scholarship. That part was true even if she'd never actually attended. Mrs. Pemberton's eyebrows raised slightly. Riverside had a reputation. Getting accepted there meant something even to someone who didn't know much about music. And you're certain you can do this? In front of 300 people? These guests they have high expectations. Jessica's stomach twisted into a knot. No, she wasn't certain. She hadn't played for an audience in 3 years. Her calluses had softened. Her confidence had eroded. But standing here with that beautiful piano just sitting empty in the next room, something inside her refused to back down. I can do it, she said. Mrs. Pemberton checked her watch. The guests were finishing their main courses. In a normal event, the entertainment would start in about 20 minutes. She looked at Jessica one more time, really looked at her like she was trying to see past the uniform and into whatever was underneath. All right, she finally said, but you'll need to change. We can't have you performing in your work clothes. What size are you? 10 minutes later, Jessica stood in Mrs. Pemberton's office staring at herself in a full-length mirror. The dress was simple but elegant, a deep navy blue that fell just below her knees. Mrs. Pemberton had pulled it from somewhere, maybe kept it for emergencies just like this. It fit well enough, and with her hair down instead of pulled back in the required server ponytail, Jessica almost didn't recognize herself. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to steady them, but it didn't help. 3 years since she'd last performed. 3 years since she'd let herself be anything other than invisible. You've got this, she whispered to her reflection, but the woman in the mirror looked terrified. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the doorway. "You're on in 5 minutes. What will you play?" Jessica's mind raced. What would work for this crowd? Something classical would be safe, respectable. But would it be memorable? Would it justify Mrs. Pemberton taking a chance on a waitress nobody had ever heard of? "I'll start with Chopin," Jessica said. "Nocturne in E-flat major. Then I'll transition into something more contemporary." Mrs. Pemberton nodded, though she still looked nervous. "The guests don't know about the change in performers. I'll make a brief introduction, keep it vague, just don't make me regret this." "I won't." Walking through the service corridors toward the main dining room felt surreal. Other servers passed by, doing double takes when they saw Jessica in the dress. Michael, who worked the bar, actually stopped and stared. "Jess? What's going on?" "I'm filling in for the pianist," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You play piano?" "Apparently I'm about to find out if I still do." The corridor opened into a small alcove near the main room. From here, Jessica could see the piano, could see the tables full of people in their expensive clothes, living their expensive lives. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. This was insane. These people came here expecting world-class entertainment. They probably went to the symphony regularly. They could afford season tickets to the opera. They knew what good music sounded like, and they definitely knew what bad music sounded like. What if she froze up there? What if her fingers fumbled over the keys? What if her memory failed and she forgot everything she'd ever learned? Mrs. Pemberton would be humiliated. Jessica would be fired. And worst of all, she'd have proved right everyone who said dreams were for people who could afford them. She thought about leaving, just turning around, changing back into her uniform, and pretending this whole thing never happened. Mrs. Pemberton could make an announcement that due to unforeseen circumstances, there would be no entertainment tonight. People would be disappointed, but they'd survive. Then she thought about Grandma Rose lying in that hospital bed 2 years ago, holding Jessica's hand with fingers that had grown thin and weak. "Promise me something, sweetie," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you won't give up on every dream. Not forever. Sometimes we have to set them aside for a while, but don't let them die completely. The world needs your music, even if you don't believe that right now." Jessica had promised, even though she didn't really mean it at the time. Dreams felt like luxuries she couldn't afford, fancy desserts when you could barely pay for bread. But here was a piano. Here was an audience. Here was one chance to remember what it felt like to be more than invisible. Mrs. Pemberton stepped out into the dining room, and the ambient noise began to quiet down. Jessica watched from the alcove as the coordinator approached a small microphone stand near the piano. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our annual Opera House fundraiser. As you know, we plan to feature a wonderful performance this evening. Due to a last-minute illness, we've had to make a change in our program." Jessica saw some guests exchange glances. A change in program at an event like this probably wasn't normal. However, Mrs. Pemberton continued, "We're fortunate to have a remarkably talented musician step in tonight. Please welcome our performer for the evening." That was Jessica's cue. This was it. The moment where she either walked out there and proved she still had something worth sharing, or stayed hidden in the alcove like she'd been hidden for the past 3 years. Her feet started moving. One step, then another. The room came into full view, 300 faces turning to look at who was about to perform for them. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. A few were still talking, not really paying attention yet. The walk to the piano felt like crossing an ocean. Every eye in the room followed her movement. She heard whispers, saw people leaning toward each other to comment. A few looked confused, like maybe they recognized her as their waitress from earlier. Jessica reached the piano bench and sat down. The room hadn't fully quieted yet. Some people were still talking in low voices, probably discussing the last-minute change, wondering who this unknown performer was. She adjusted the bench slightly, positioned her feet on the pedals, and placed her hands above the keys. They were still shaking, but less now. Something about sitting at the piano felt right, felt like coming home after a long journey. The room's noise faded to a soft murmur. People were waiting, some with interest, some with impatience, some with clear skepticism written across their faces. Jessica took a deep breath, closed her eyes for just a moment, and let her fingers fall to the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the remaining whispers like sunlight through morning fog. Jessica's fingers found the keys like they'd never left, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from the piano, each note precise and deliberate. For the first few measures, she kept her eyes closed, shutting out the room full of strangers and their expectations. It was just her and the music, the way it used to be in Grandma Rose's living room when she'd practice for hours until the light outside faded to dark. The conversation stopped. Jessica could feel the shift in the room, the way the energy changed when people started actually listening instead of just hearing background noise. She opened her eyes and let her gaze drift across the keys, watching her own fingers dance over black and white. This piece had always been one of her favorites. Chopin knew something about longing, about beauty mixed with sadness, about dreams that felt just out of reach. Every note carried weight, emotion, a story without words. Jessica poured 3 years of suppressed feeling into those notes. 3 years of serving tables instead of playing stages. 3 years of making herself small and invisible and quiet. But right now, in this moment, she wasn't quiet at all. The middle section came, the part that always made her chest tighten, where the melody climbed higher and the emotion swelled until it felt like it might overflow. Her fingers moved faster, pressing harder, drawing every bit of sound from the instrument that it could give. The piano responded like it had been waiting for someone to really play it, not just demonstrate technical skill, but to make it sing. A woman at a nearby table had stopped with her wine glass halfway to her lips, frozen in place. A man in an expensive suit had turned his chair slightly to get a better view. All around the room, the same thing was happening. People were paying attention. Real attention. The kind you can't fake or force. Jessica transitioned into the final section, letting the melody settle back down into something softer, more reflective. Like watching storm clouds pass and seeing clear sky beyond. When she played the final note, she let it sustain, her foot holding down the pedal until the sound faded completely into silence. For a heartbeat, the room remained absolutely still. Then someone started clapping, then someone else. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping people do at fancy events. Real applause, enthusiastic, surprised, genuine. Jessica felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't expected that. Part of her had expected them to tolerate her playing, maybe give a courteous acknowledgement before returning to their conversations and their wine. But this was different. They'd actually felt something. She could stop now. She could stand up, take a bow, and return to being invisible. She'd done what Mrs. Pemberton asked. Nobody could say she'd embarrassed the event or failed to deliver. But that thing inside her, that part she'd kept buried for 3 years, was awake now. And it wasn't ready to go back to sleep. Jessica's hands returned to the keys. This time, she didn't choose something classical and safe. She started playing a contemporary song, one she'd loved back in high school, one that had made her want to be a performer in the first place. Her fingers adapted it for piano, creating an arrangement on the spot, letting instinct guide her through the melody. And then she started to sing. Her voice came out quieter than she intended at first, rusty from lack of use. But it grew stronger with each word, finding its power, remembering what it could do. The song was about second chances, about finding courage when you thought you'd lost it, about refusing to let circumstances define who you were. Jessica had forgotten this feeling. The way music could take over your entire body until you weren't really thinking anymore, just feeling and expressing and being completely present in the moment. Every word of the song felt personal, like she was telling her own story to a room full of strangers who suddenly didn't feel like strangers at all. Her voice filled the dining room, rich and clear, hitting notes she'd worried she might not reach anymore. But they were there waiting for her, like old friends who'd never really left. The high notes soared, the low notes resonated, and in between, every word carried emotion that 3 years of holding everything in had built up like water behind a dam. People had started recording on their phones. Jessica noticed them out of the corner of her eye, little lights glowing in the dim room as cameras captured the moment. A few people had tears on their faces. One woman was clutching her husband's hand so tight her knuckles had gone white. This was why she'd wanted to perform. Not for fame or money or recognition, though those things would have been nice. But for this, for the connection that happens when music breaks down the walls between people and makes everyone feel something real together. For those few minutes when a room full of different people with different lives all shared the same emotional experience. The song built toward its climax, and Jessica gave it everything she had. Her voice pushed higher, stronger, carrying the melody to its peak before bringing it back down for the gentle ending. She played the final chord and let it ring out, her heart pounding, her hands trembling slightly on the keys. The applause this time was thunderous. People stood up from their tables. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, like they couldn't quite process what they'd just witnessed. The sound washed over Jessica in waves, overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs slightly unsteady, and managed a small bow. Mrs. Pemberton was standing near the wall with both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. The expression on her face said everything. She'd taken a desperate gamble on a waitress with no credentials, and somehow it had paid off in ways she never could have predicted. Jessica started to walk away from the piano, thinking her moment was over, but the applause didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. People were calling out for more, actually requesting an encore from someone whose name they didn't even know. She looked at Mrs. Pemberton, uncertain what to do. The coordinator nodded vigorously, gesturing back toward the piano. One more song. They wanted one more song. Jessica returned to the bench and the room quieted down, everyone eager to hear what she'd play next. She thought about what would work, what would give them something meaningful to end on. Then it came to her. A song her grandmother used to sing when Jessica was little, one about holding on to hope even in dark times, about believing in tomorrow even when today felt impossible. She started playing, and this time she wasn't nervous at all. This time she was exactly where she belonged. The melody was simple but beautiful, the kind of song that felt like coming home. Jessica sang it the way Grandma Rose used to, with warmth and tenderness and unshakable faith that good things were possible if you didn't give up on them. Around the room, something had shifted. These weren't just wealthy strangers anymore, not just people living in a different world than hers. They were human beings feeling human emotions, connected by something that transcended money and status and all the things that usually separated people into categories. When the song ended, the applause came again, but softer this time, more reverent. Jessica stood and took another bow, and this time when she walked away from the piano, she knew she was walking toward something new, something that had been waiting for her all along, patiently waiting for her to be ready to claim it. Mrs. Pemberton met her halfway across the room and grabbed both her hands. That was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. "Where have you been hiding?" "Serving your tables," Jessica said with a small smile. Before Mrs. Pemberton could respond, guests started approaching. A woman in diamonds wanted to know if Jessica taught lessons. A man in a perfectly tailored suit asked if she had a card, said he ran a restaurant downtown that featured live music on weekends. Someone else wanted to know if she'd recorded anything, if her music was available online. Jessica didn't have answers to most of their questions. She didn't have business cards or recordings or even a social media presence worth mentioning. She was just a waitress who'd taken a chance when a piano sat empty and opportunity knocked. But as she stood there, surrounded by people who suddenly saw her as someone worth their time and attention, she realized something important. Dreams didn't die just because you put them aside. They waited, sometimes for years, waiting for the right moment, the right chance, the right amount of courage to wake them back up. Jessica barely slept that night. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, seeing the faces of people as they listened, hearing the applause that had seemed to go on forever. The stack of business cards on her nightstand felt like something from someone else's life, not hers. When she finally drifted off around 3 in the morning, she dreamed of her grandmother. In the dream, Grandma Rose was young again, healthy, sitting in her old living room next to the upright piano. She was smiling that smile that made her whole face light up. "I told you," she said in the dream. "I told you the music was still in there." Jessica woke up with tears on her face and sunlight streaming through her apartment window. For a few seconds, she wondered if the whole thing had been a dream. But no, the navy blue dress was hanging on her closet door. The business cards were still on her nightstand. It had really happened. Her phone had 14 missed calls and over 30 text messages. Most were from numbers she didn't recognize. She scrolled through them, her heart beating faster with each one. "Hi, this is David Chen from Riverside Talent Agency. I was at the Belmore Club last night. We need to talk. Hello, my name is Patricia Williams. I run the entertainment program at the Grandview Hotel. Would you be interested in discussing a residency? This is Tom Rodriguez from WKRT Radio. We'd love to have you on our morning show to talk about last night's performance. Jessica set the phone down, her hands shaking. This was overwhelming. Yesterday she'd been a waitress. Today people were calling her about radio interviews and residencies and talent agencies. How did life change this fast? She made coffee and sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the business cards spread out in front of her. One stood out from the rest. Simple white card, elegant black lettering. David Chen, Riverside Talent Agency. There was a handwritten note on the back. I've been in this business 20 years. What you did last night was special. Please call me. Jessica picked up her phone 3 times before actually making the call. Each time she chickened out at the last second, her finger hovering over the dial button before setting the phone back down. What would she even say? Hi, I'm the waitress who played piano last night. On the 4th try, she pressed the button before she could change her mind again. A man answered on the 2nd ring. David Chen. Hi, this is Jessica. From last night. At the Belmore Club, you left me your card. Jessica. Thank you for calling. I've been hoping to hear from you. Listen, I don't want to waste your time, so I'll be direct. What you did last night was remarkable. The raw talent, the emotional connection with the audience, the way you commanded that room. That's not something you can teach. That's genuine. Jessica felt her face getting hot. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I should even do it. I haven't performed in years. That's what made it even more impressive. Most trained performers can't create that kind of moment. You want to know something? I recorded part of your performance on my phone. I've watched it maybe 20 times since last night. Posted a clip on my social media. It's got over 50,000 views already. 50,000? Jessica's voice came out as a squeak. That's impossible. Check your phone. I bet people have been tagging you. This is going viral, Jessica. People respond to authenticity. They respond to real talent and real emotion. You've got both. Jessica pulled the phone away from her ear and opened her social media app. Her notifications were exploding. Hundreds of tags, comments, shares, videos of her performance from different angles. All posted by people who'd been at the event. The comments were overwhelming. This made me cry. Who is this woman? Best performance I've seen in years. Why isn't she famous already? I don't understand, Jessica said, putting the phone back to her ear. I'm just a waitress who played piano. No, David said firmly. You're a performer who's been waiting tables. There's a difference. Look, I'd like to meet with you. Talk about representation, about opportunities. Are you free this week? They set up a meeting for Wednesday afternoon. After hanging up, Jessica sat in her kitchen for a long time, just processing everything. Her phone kept buzzing with new notifications, new messages, new opportunities appearing like they'd been waiting for her all along. She called the Belmore Club around noon. Her manager answered, sounding stressed as usual. Jessica, thank goodness. Listen, about last night. Mrs. Pemberton told me what happened. That was pretty incredible from what I hear. Thank you. I'm calling about my schedule. I'm supposed to work tonight, but I have some meetings coming up this week and I wanted to... Actually, her manager interrupted. Mrs. Pemberton wanted me to talk to you about that. She's wondering if you'd be interested in a different arrangement. Instead of serving, she wants to know if you'd perform regularly. Friday and Saturday nights. Good pay, much better than server wages. She said after last night, people have been calling asking when you'll play again. Jessica almost dropped the phone. People are calling about me. 6 calls this morning alone. Mrs. Pemberton sees an opportunity here. She wants to make you the featured entertainment. Build it into the club's regular programming. It was too much, too fast. Yesterday she'd been invisible. Today people were calling clubs asking about her. Today a talent agent wanted to represent her. Today her entire life was turning upside down, and she didn't know if she was ready for it. Can I think about it? Jessica asked. Of course. Take a day or two. But between you and me, this is a good opportunity. Don't overthink it. After hanging up, Jessica did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She opened the drawer in her bedroom where she'd stored all her old dreams. The college acceptance letter. The scholarship offer from Riverside Music Academy. A photo of her at 18, sitting at a piano looking confident and hopeful and young. She'd put these away because they hurt too much to look at. They reminded her of everything she'd given up, everything she'd sacrificed. But looking at them now, she realized something. She hadn't been giving up her dreams. She'd been postponing them, waiting until the time was right. Maybe the time was finally right. Her phone rang again. This time it was a local news station. They wanted to do a story about the mysterious waitress who'd captivated a room full of wealthy donors. The reporter said people were calling it the feel-good story of the year. Jessica agreed to the interview, surprising herself. The old Jessica, the invisible one, would have said no, would have been too scared of attention, too worried about failing, too convinced that people like her didn't get chances like this. But something had changed last night when her fingers touched those piano keys. Something had woken up inside her that refused to go back to sleep. Every time she thought about saying no, about playing it safe, about going back to being invisible, she remembered the feeling of playing that piano. The connection with the audience. The way music had flowed through her like it had been trapped inside for too long and finally found a way out. That evening, Jessica went to visit her grandmother's grave. She brought flowers and sat on the grass next to the headstone, telling Grandma Rose about everything that had happened, about the performance, the phone calls, the opportunities appearing out of nowhere. "I'm scared," she said out loud, not caring if anyone heard her talking to a grave. What if I fail? What if this is just a fluke and I can't do it again? What if everyone realizes I'm not actually that talented, that it was just one good night? The wind rustled through the trees overhead. A bird sang somewhere nearby. Jessica sat there in the quiet and slowly, she started to feel calmer. Grandma Rose used to say that fear and excitement felt the same in your body. Fast heartbeat, sweaty palms, butterflies in your stomach. The only difference was in your mind and how you chose to interpret those feelings. Maybe she was excited, not scared. Maybe both. "I think I'm going to do it," Jessica said to the headstone. "I think I'm going to take the chance." "You'd want me to, right? You'd tell me to stop playing it safe and go after what I really want." She could almost hear her grandmother's voice responding. "Of course I would, sweetie. I've been waiting for you to figure that out." Jessica stayed until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then she drove home, pulled out her laptop and started researching everything she'd need to know. How to work with a talent agent, what questions to ask about performance contracts, how to build a social media presence, how to turn one magical night into an actual career. She had a lot to learn, but for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just surviving, and that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since that night at the Belmore Club, and sometimes Jessica still couldn't believe any of it was real. She'd wake up in the morning and have to remind herself that yes, this was actually her life now. The meeting with David Chen had led to representation. Her Friday and Saturday performances at the Belmore Club had turned into standing-room-only events. People made reservations weeks in advance just to hear her play. Mrs. Pemberton had to hire extra staff to handle the increased business. But the real turning point came from an unexpected place. One of the videos from that first night had caught the attention of a producer in New York who was casting for a new theatrical production. Not Broadway, not yet, but a well-respected theater company that had launched the careers of several famous performers. They wanted Jessica to audition. She'd almost said no. The old fear crept back in, whispering that she wasn't ready, that she'd gotten lucky once but lightning didn't strike twice, that people like her didn't actually make it in theater. But then she remembered sitting at her grandmother's grave, making a promise to take chances instead of playing it safe. The audition was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. A room full of serious-faced people watching her, clipboards in hand, evaluating every note, every gesture, every moment. She sang the song her grandmother used to love, the one about holding on to hope. When she finished, there was silence. She thought she'd failed. Then the director stood up and said, "When can you start rehearsals?" Jessica got the part. A supporting role, but a real role in a real production. The show would run for 3 months with potential to extend if ticket sales were strong. She'd have to quit her serving job completely, commit fully to being a performer. It was everything she'd ever wanted, and everything that terrified her. She gave her notice at the Belmore Club with mixed feelings. The place had been her safety net for 3 years, the steady paycheck that kept her afloat. Mrs. Pemberton threw her a going-away party, and half the regular guests showed up. The same people who used to not see her when she served their tables now lined up to wish her well. to tell her they'd be coming to see her show. "You know what's funny?" Michael from the bar said at the party. "You were always here. All this talent was right in front of us the whole time, and we never knew." "I didn't really know either," Jessica admitted. "I'd kind of convinced myself that part of my life was over. But it wasn't over. It was just waiting." The show opened on a Thursday night in late spring. Jessica's hands shook as she stood backstage, listening to the audience filing into their seats. This was so different from playing piano at a club. This was theater with lights and costumes, and other actors depending on her to hit her marks and remember her lines. David Chen was in the audience. Mrs. Pemberton had brought a group from the Belmore Club, and sitting in the third row, Jessica had left an empty seat. She'd put a photo of Grandma Rose on the chair, wanted her there somehow, even if it was just in spirit. The lights came up. The show began. And when Jessica stepped onto that stage for her first scene, something clicked into place. This was where she belonged, not because she was the most talented person in the world, not because she was destined for fame, but because this was what made her feel alive. This was what made all the struggle and sacrifice and years of waiting mean something. Her big musical number came in the second act. The story called for her character to have a moment of realization, a breakthrough where she finally understood her own strength. Jessica poured everything into that performance. Every year of putting dreams aside. Every double shift worked while her feet ached. Every moment of feeling invisible. Every second of doubt about whether she was good enough. The song built to its climax and Jessica's voice soared through the theater, filling every corner with sound and emotion and truth. When she held the final note, the audience was completely silent. Then they erupted. People were on their feet, applauding before the scene had even ended. The other actors on stage had to pause, waiting for the applause to die down so they could continue. Jessica had never felt anything like it. This was different from the surprise and delight at the Belmore Club. This was validation. This was confirmation that she hadn't been crazy to take the risk, to believe in herself, to choose the uncertain path over the safe one. The show was a success. Critics praised the entire cast but mentioned Jessica specifically in several reviews. "A newcomer who performs with the confidence of a seasoned professional," one reviewer wrote. "Raw talent combined with genuine emotional depth," said another. David called her the day after opening night. "We need to talk about next steps. I'm getting calls. People want to know who you are, where you've been, what you're doing next. What am I doing next?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious about his answer. "Whatever you want." That's the beautiful thing about talent. Once people see it, once you prove you have it, doors start opening. The question is which doors you want to walk through. Jessica thought about that for a long time. She could chase bigger and bigger opportunities, always reaching for the next level, the next show, the next achievement. Or she could be more intentional, choosing projects that meant something to her, that felt true to who she was. She started teaching on her off days. Just a few students at first, kids whose families couldn't afford expensive music lessons. She remembered what it felt like to have talent but no opportunity, to have dreams but no clear path to reach them. If she could help even one kid avoid giving up on their dreams the way she almost had, it would be worth it. One of her students was a teenage girl named Maya who worked part-time at a fast food restaurant to help her single mom with bills. She had an incredible voice but no confidence, no belief that someone like her could actually make it. "I'm just being realistic," Maya said during one lesson. "People like me don't become performers. That's for people with money, with connections, with privilege." Jessica sat down next to her at the piano. "Can I tell you a story? About 3 months ago, I was serving tables at a fancy club. I'd given up on music completely. Then one night, the scheduled performer canceled, and I took a chance. Just one chance, and it changed everything. "But you're talented," Maya protested. "So are you. Talent isn't the question. The question is whether you're willing to take the chance when it comes. Because it will come, Maya. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but somewhere down the line, there's going to be a moment where you can either play it safe or take a risk. And when that moment comes, I hope you'll remember that a waitress once walked up to a piano in a room full of strangers and decided to bet on herself." 6 months after that first performance at the Belmore Club, Jessica stood on stage at a small award ceremony for emerging artists in theater. She'd been nominated for her performance, though she didn't expect to win. There were people in the category who'd been training their whole lives, who'd gone to prestigious schools, who had all the advantages she'd never had. When they called her name, she was so shocked she almost didn't stand up. David had to nudge her. "Go," he said, grinning. "That's you. You won." Walking to the stage felt like floating. Someone handed her a small trophy, and she stood at the microphone looking out at the audience. She thought about all the speeches she'd imagined giving over the years. Back when she was young and full of dreams, those speeches had been about talent and destiny and being special. But the speech she gave was different. "I almost didn't take the chance," she said. "I'd convinced myself that dreams were for other people. People with money or connections or luck. Then one night I decided to stop being invisible. I decided to try even though I was terrified of failing. This award isn't just for me. It's for everyone who's been told they're not good enough, that their dreams are unrealistic, that they should be practical instead of passionate. If I can do this, you can too. You just have to be willing to walk up to the piano when the moment comes." The applause was warm and genuine. As Jessica walked off stage, trophy in hand, she thought about that night at the Belmore Club. How scared she'd been. How close she'd come to staying invisible forever. Sometimes the distance between your current life and the life you want isn't as far as you think. Sometimes it's just one moment of courage, one decision to try, one choice to believe in yourself even when nobody else does. Jessica had walked to the piano and her whole world changed. Not because she was special or chosen or destined for greatness, but because when the opportunity came, when that piano sat empty and waiting, she decided to take the chance. And that, she realized, made all the difference.